This is Let's Talk About Mental Health, a weekly podcast about mental health and well-being, hosted by Jeremy Godwin. Let's talk about mental health, because the more we talk about it, the easier it gets. Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Let's Talk About Mental Health, a podcast all about the good, the bad, and the ugly of mental health and well-being. I'm Jeremy Godwin, and I'm very glad that you could join me for this episode, which you can either listen to as a podcast or read on letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au. This week, we're going to be talking about taking chances. We'll be talking about the importance of taking calculated risks in life and how to throw caution to the wind to make things happen in your life for the sake of your mental health and well-being. So, let's get talking. Have you ever wanted to do something that you were passionate about, but you just haven't because something has held you back? This week's episode is all about taking chances. What holds us back, the difference between a calculated risk and a regular risk, as well as how and why to push through and take calculated risks in your life. When I was a kid, I wanted to either be a pop star or a writer. It turns out that I can't sing. Well, I can, but it's so out of tune that people wouldn't pay to hear it. They'd probably pay to make it stop, so that's something to consider for the future. But I've always written in my spare time, and a few years ago, I had a stab at doing something about it, releasing my first book and taking small steps towards building a career. But then I found myself holding back and making excuses for why it wasn't the right thing to do right now. So I went back to working in the business world, and for anyone that's listened before, we all know how that turned out. And that brings me to today's topic, taking chances. I guess I subconsciously chose taking chances as the topic for this week because what I'm doing at the moment involves a lot of risk. I haven't really gone into too much detail about my process behind starting up Let's Talk About Mental Health, but to cut a long story short, I'm taking at least 6 months to focus on this full time and to see where it takes me. Now, that involves risk, and there are 2 ways to go about anything that involves risk. You can either go in guns blazing without any forethought whatsoever and just deal with the aftermath once the dust settles, or you can spend the time to carefully weigh up the pros and cons beforehand, as well as the opportunities and potential challenges, in order to make a more considered and balanced decision. And that's what a calculated risk is. It's something that has mostly been second nature for me at work, because when you work in the corporate world, you're expected to do your due diligence on things rather than just rush in like a bull in a china shop. A calculated risk is still a risk, however, and it might still fail. But it means that you've taken the time to work through all the possible reasons not to do something, all the possible things that could go wrong, before you jump in and actually do it. So, when I talk about taking chances, I'm not talking about just going off and doing whatever you want while you hope for the best that it works out. That's not taking a chance, that's a leap of faith. And while there's nothing wrong with taking a leap of faith, you'll find that you have far less control over what comes your way after the initial leap, and that means that you'll be less prepared to tackle any problems that might arise. Think of it this way. Would you start up a new business without at least doing a little bit of market research and creating even a basic business plan? I certainly hope not. It's a cliche for sure, but failing to plan is planning to fail. By all means, put your faith in the universe, a higher power, the law of attraction, Lizzo, whatever works for you. But don't be naive and expect that taking a chance will pay off if you don't put in the work to give it the greatest chance of success possible. A calculated risk also involves giving something a go because the potential rewards outweigh any risk. Some examples of taking chances could include changing career, moving to a new city, buying a house that needs a lot of work, turning a hobby into a business, traveling the world for a year, chasing your passions, etc., etc. Basically, if it involves pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and taking a risk, it's an example of taking chances. As always, I'm talking about doing things that don't cause harm to others or yourself. Let's talk for a moment about why this topic is related to mental health and well-being. The notion of taking chances is actually very relevant to mental health and well-being because often it's our unfulfilled dreams and desires that can weigh on us and cause us to start playing those horrible what-if games in our mind, and that's just not healthy. Good mental health and well-being involves being satisfied with where you are today. If you're not satisfied, then it's up to you to do something about it. Now, I hope you'll notice that I said satisfied and not happy. Happiness is great, but it's an emotion which is fleeting and it can never be a permanent state because life happens and as a result, your emotions will fluctuate. Satisfied, on the other hand, is about being content with what you have, what you do, and where you are in life. These are all things that can contribute to happiness in the long term, so that even when shit happens, which inevitably happens, even when shit happens, you're able to recognize that your life in general is where you want it to be. That's what satisfaction means. For example, if you always wanted to be an actor, yet you work full-time as an accountant, then perhaps you might find yourself feeling unfulfilled or dissatisfied with where you are in life. And that's where it's an opportunity for you to take a chance and find a way to integrate what it is that you're passionate about, in other words, acting, into your current life. And that can happen side by side. It doesn't mean that you need to throw the accounting out the window. It means that you need to find a way to integrate what you're truly passionate about into what it is that you do to pay the bills. I mentioned before that I wanted to either be a writer or a pop star when I grew up. I was a bit socially awkward as a kid, very much an introverted extrovert. So I'd spend a lot of my spare time either writing stories or writing songs. And as much as I enjoyed creating stories, it was back when I was young, it was music that made me most excited. I wanted to be a pop star so bad that I could taste it when I was a kid. Unfortunately, though, I can't play an instrument and I certainly can't carry a tune. And that only became worse after my voice broke. But even in spite of all of that, it never stopped me from belting out an impromptu solo number, or 10, at the drop of a hat. On the rare occasion that my mother would leave me at home on my own when she'd go out, I'd use the living room to put on a full-scale concert. For me, it really didn't matter that I couldn't sing that well. I was so passionate about music that it just made me happy. But somewhere along the way, I stopped writing songs and I stopped dreaming big. And instead, I focused on building a professional career for myself. And I think we all do that. Well, a lot of us do that, I should say. In my spare time, I still did a lot of writing. I was writing both fiction and non-fiction. And I was, and still am, very, very passionate about it. But I held myself back from pursuing writing, whether it's stories or non-fiction or what I'm doing now. I held myself back from pursuing it seriously due to a fear of failure. I'd long ago accepted the fact that I wasn't about to light up the music charts. And in hindsight, I think I hesitated to do anything about becoming a published author because I didn't want that dream, that one big thing that I still loved doing more than anything else in the entire world. I didn't want that to be taken away from me as well because, look, what happened if I just suddenly discovered that I actually wasn't good at writing at all? So all that fear, all of that insecurity was all bubbling away at the surface, and that's what held me back. And so now I'm having to push past all of that stuff and take some calculated risks because I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what if. And that brings me into why do we avoid taking chances? The main one is fear. Fear is a very powerful motivator or demotivator when you think about it. Fear will keep you stuck in the same place while the world overtakes you, until all of a sudden you're so far behind that it seems utterly impossible that you might ever be able to do those things that you once dreamed of. Along with fear, one of the common things that we all do, or many of us do, is that we wait for the right time to do things. Guess what? There isn't a right time to do anything. Life doesn't work like that. Sometimes we just need to jump right in and take a chance. After all, what's the worst that could happen? It won't be perfect. So what? There's a notion of perfection that has somehow rooted itself really deeply in our culture, and I, for one, am just saying to hell with that. Life isn't perfect. Life is messy. So why not take a chance and do something that makes your heart sing? On that note, let me just point out it is never too late to try something new or to pursue a dream. Stan Lee was 39 when he created his first comic. We all know how big the Marvel Universe is now. Samuel L. Jackson had his first big film role when he was 43. And Julia Child, the original celebrity chef, released her first cookbook at the age of 50. And don't even get me started on the subject of Iris Apfel. She's the inspirational 98-year-old fashion icon and businesswoman who found global fame in her 90s and signed a contract as a model at age 97. I will say it again, it is never too late to take a chance. Another part of fear that holds us back is fear of failure. And okay, I get it. Nobody wants to make a fool of themselves and waste their time or their money pursuing something that might not turn out the way that we want. But if you fail, it's not the end of the world, because mistakes are how we learn. I talked about that in episode 2 of Let's Talk About Mental Health. And if you haven't already listened to or read that episode, then I'd highly encourage you to do so, because I talk about practical steps that you can take to deal with making mistakes. So a lot of what I'm talking about here is to do with your mindset and how you view the world. And frankly, you have a choice whether or not you want to be fearful of failure or if you want to give yourself permission to try new things. Part of that comes down to embracing that you are where you are today because this is your path and going from that point forward. Now, I am a firm believer that we are exactly where we need to be right now. And that everything that happens in our lives, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the downright ridiculous, all happens for a reason. You can either choose to learn from it and run with it, or you can choose to become overwhelmed by it and try to run from it, which usually just keeps you huddled in a corner, rocking back and forth. You have a choice when it comes to your life. You can live it, or you can let it live you. Taking a chance pushes you out of your comfort zone, and it can bring about real fundamental change in your life. When we made the decision to move from the city to the country, I could never have imagined all of the opportunities that have come our way as a direct result of taking that one calculated risk. If you want things to change, you have to change. I keep on talking about risk and more specifically calculated risks. But what does that actually mean? A calculated risk is when you do something that is risky, but where you have seriously thought through the various risks and have a fair idea of how you might tackle them if and when they arise. It's about finding the right balance between logic and emotions. Think of an entrepreneur setting up a new business. They're likely to be doing it because it's something that they're passionate about. But passion alone doesn't overcome challenges. And many small to medium enterprises fail within the first 3 years of operation. To be successful, it's important to detach yourself from the emotional side of whatever it is that you're considering doing. And then the risks need to be balanced logically with the potential rewards. For some people, that's just too hard to do, and it can be almost impossible to distance themselves from the emotional connection for long enough to even be able to talk through their idea with someone who isn't emotionally invested in it. When I was thinking about starting Let's Talk About Mental Health, I took time to talk it through with a few people whose perspectives mean a lot to me. And that gave me a few extra things to think about, including some potential risks that I hadn't even considered, so I was then able to better plan for them. By knowing what possible risks might be associated with whatever it is that you're wanting to do, you can then give serious thought and consideration to how they might be addressed, and if the payoff would still be worth it if those risks actually happened. To be successful, you need to be critical, and that's tough to do. Which is a nice segue into the practical bit of this week's episode. How exactly do you process through whatever it is that you're wanting to take a chance on? And how can you then work through what is a calculated risk versus just a potential bad risk so that you know whether or not something is worth trying? First, contemplate, which is basically just another word for reflection. And you all know how much I love a bit of reflection time. If there's something that you want to do, ask yourself why you aren't already doing whatever it is that you want to do. You need to really understand what has held you back, or you won't be going anywhere. Be specific though. Be really clear about what it is that you want to do and why you want to do it, what has held you back in the past and what's going to be different this time. And be sure that your heart is in it 100%, not 99%, 100%. Next, confront whatever has held you back and challenge your beliefs. Fear of failure, fear of looking like an idiot, fear of losing everything. Until you confront those fears, they will control you. Challenge your beliefs about yourself. Instead of thinking about what you can't do, think about what you can do instead. A positive mindset goes a long way to challenging negative thought patterns. Now, calculate the risks. Give thought to what you want to do and how you might go about it and what the potential risks are. Think through your options and look at different ways that you could do whatever it is that you want to do. Consider what could possibly go wrong, because shortly you're going to create a plan to tackle that. While you're doing this part, canvass others for their thoughts on your idea. Ask others, including professionals or a mentor if you have one, ask them for impartial advice and guidance. Now, don't let them fear talk you out of your idea, but ask them for rational and logical advice and really listen to what they have to say. Don't take offense. If the feedback is constructive, then it's a really good opportunity for you to learn from it. If it's emotional and irrational, you can do what you want with it. I'd be putting that to the side, quite frankly. But look, constructive feedback is, you may not want to hear it, but it is extremely useful. Now it's time to categorize the risks as being either acceptable or unacceptable. For example, an acceptable risk might be to invest a small amount of money from your savings that you know you can afford, knowing that you might also lose that amount of money. Whereas an unacceptable risk might be losing your house or your car or your life. It probably goes without saying, but acceptable equals good and unacceptable equals bad, just so we're clear. If you identify an unacceptable risk, you need to change direction if necessary. So tweak your plan so that the risk level becomes acceptable. Never dive into something if the risk is unacceptable. Once you've done all of that, create a plan. Be specific about what you want to do, why you want to do it, how it will look and feel, how you will make it happen step by step, and then add in what potential challenges and risks you have identified and how you will handle them if they manifest. Plan, plan, plan. Take as long as you need for this phase. Once you've worked through all of that stuff, there's only one way forward. Choose to make it happen. Make the choice, take action, and stick to it. Sure, it's probably going to be a lot more complicated than that. I mean, this podcast and blog and everything certainly wasn't any kind of straightforward to get it up and running, and it certainly wasn't easy. But what I'm saying is, once you've made the choice and committed to it 100%, you will be more inclined to push through the roadblocks that will inevitably pop up. It's a cliche, but you've got to be in it to win it. Thousands of people go and move to Los Angeles every year, hoping to find fame and fortune. Now, we know that only a small number of those people will actually make it. But you know what? At least everyone that's doing that is giving it a go. If that's what they really want to do, then at least they're trying. As Irene Cara sang back in the 1980s song, Flashdance, What a Feeling, take your passion and make it happen. And yes, I will take any opportunity I can to work an 80s or 90s lyric into my work. So that is my advice for how to approach taking chances. I don't know about you, but I for one am making a choice, and that choice involves taking more chances. I'm devoting 100% of my energy to Let's Talk About Mental Health, and I'll see where it takes me. Will it pay off? Who knows? Am I happy? You bet I am. In the words of those great philosophers of the late 80s, Mel and Kim, taking chances, bold advances. Don't care if you think we're out of line. That's respectable, in case you were wondering. I can't believe I just did that. Anyway, actually, I can believe it. I'm the happiest that I have been in a very long time. I feel energized, excited, terrified, and optimistic all at once. It is quite possibly the greatest feeling in the world because I'm following my heart and I'm doing something that I feel passionate about. So, when it comes to taking chances and mental health and well-being, here are a few tips that I'd like to leave you with as I head towards the end of this week's episode. Number 1, listen to your heart. And yeah, I'm quoting Roxette there. If you feel unfulfilled and there's something you've always wanted to do, take a chance. You'll never know if you never try. Number 2, take the time to create a plan and really work through the possible challenges so that you can then take calculated risks. And third and final, be prepared to confront your own mindset because when we feel fear, it can stop us from taking the next step. So be prepared to push yourself out of your comfort zone. I'm going to close out with a quote that I'd encourage you to reflect on. I really like this quote by New Zealand writer Catherine Mansfield, which ties into this week's topic of taking chances. And it is, risk anything. Care no more for the opinions of others, for those voices. Do the hardest thing on earth for you. Act for yourself. Face the truth. Let me repeat that one more time. Risk anything. Care no more for the opinions of others, for those voices. Do the hardest thing on earth for you. Act for yourself. Face the truth. All right. So to summarize, when you have a strong desire to do something and your instinct is screaming out at you, then do it. Do it now. Don't wait. Make a choice to take a chance. What's the worst thing that could possibly happen? You'll fail? All right, but at least you gave it a go, and you won't be sitting in your rocking chair at 85 asking what if. Besides, you might succeed. And that brings me to the end of this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me. Next week, I will be talking about self-care. I hope you can join me for that episode. In the meantime, you can find Let's Talk About Mental Health on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest at LTAMH Official. That's LTAMH Official. Also, you can read this article and the weekly Mental Health Talk newsletter via the website, which is letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au. Thank you again for your time, and I'll talk to you next week.